They were 73 and 76, homeless because their own children stole everything, and the only shelter they could find was inside a rusted steel factory everyone said was cursed. But what they discovered in the darkness beneath those forgotten floors would make their betrayers regret every lie they ever told. Before we dive into this story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The snow fell hard that January night, the kind of cold that bites through bone and settles in your chest like regret. Merritt Ashworth sat in the driver's seat of a 1987 Buick LeSabre, the engine long since shut off to conserve what little gas remained in the tank. Beside him, wrapped in 2 threadbare blankets and a coat that had seen better decades, sat his wife Cordelia. They'd been married for 52 years. 52 years of shared coffee in the morning, folded laundry on Sunday afternoons, and the kind of love that doesn't need words because it's built into the rhythm of breathing. But tonight, they had no home, no bed, no walls to keep the winter out, just each other and a car that smelled like old upholstery and broken dreams. Merritt was 76, his hands still strong despite the arthritis that had begun to claim his knuckles. He'd worked as a machinist for 43 years, building parts for factories, engines, and machines that outlasted the companies that ordered them. Cordelia was 73, a retired seamstress who once stitched wedding dresses so beautiful that brides cried when they first saw themselves in the mirror. Together, they had raised 3 children in a small brick house on Maple Avenue, the kind of house with a porch swing and a garden Cordelia tended every spring. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. They had savings. They had their home paid off. They had a future that felt secure. And then their children took it all. It started slowly, the way poison always does. Their eldest son, Dalton, had come to them 2 years ago with concern etched into his face. He was 48, worked in real estate, and spoke with the kind of confidence that made people believe him, even when they shouldn't. "Mom, Dad," he'd said, sitting at their kitchen table with a folder full of papers. "I've been looking at your finances, and I'm worried. You're getting older. What if something happens? What if you forget to pay a bill or someone takes advantage of you?" Merritt had bristled at the suggestion. "We've been managing our money just fine for 5 decades, son." But Dalton had been persistent, gentle even. I know. But wouldn't it be easier if someone helped? I could set up automatic payments, make sure everything's handled. You could just relax and enjoy retirement." Cordelia had looked at Merritt, uncertainty flickering in her green eyes. Their daughter Imogene, 45 and a nurse, had echoed Dalton's concerns during Sunday dinner the following week. "Daddy, you forgot to take your blood pressure medication twice last month. I'm just worried about you both." Then their youngest, Lowell, 42 and chronically unemployed, had added his voice to the chorus. "You guys deserve to not worry about bills and paperwork. Let us handle it." It was the kind of love that felt suffocating, but they'd convinced themselves it came from a good place. So they'd signed papers, given Dalton power of attorney, let Imogen access their bank accounts to help organize their medications and bills, trusted Lowell when he said he'd handle the property taxes. Within 6 months, their savings account had been drained. The house they'd paid off decades ago suddenly had a reverse mortgage they didn't remember signing. Bills went unpaid despite the money that should have covered them. When Merritt tried to access their account, he found it nearly empty. When he confronted Dalton, his son had explanations that sounded reasonable but felt wrong. "Medical expenses, Dad. The roof repair. Remember? We talked about this." But they hadn't. Cordelia started finding discrepancies, records that didn't match, signatures that looked like hers but weren't quite right. When she mentioned it to Imogene, her daughter had patted her hand with a condescending smile. "Mum, you're just confused. It's normal at your age." That phrase haunted her. At your age. Like being in their 70s meant they'd lost the ability to think, to remember, to know when something was wrong. The final blow came 8 months ago when they received an eviction notice, their own house. The bank claimed they'd defaulted on loan payments. Merritt didn't even know they had a loan. He'd tried to fight it, hired a lawyer with money they didn't have, but the paperwork was ironclad. Somehow, their signatures were on everything. The lawyer had looked at them with pity and said, "I'm sorry, but unless you can prove fraud, there's nothing we can do. And fraud cases against family members are nearly impossible to win." They'd lost the house in October. Their children had offered to let them move in, of course, but the conditions were impossible. Sign over their social security checks, agree to be declared mentally incompetent, give up what little independence they had left. Merritt had refused. "We didn't survive the Great Recession, 2 wars, and 50 years of hard work just to become prisoners in our own children's homes." So they'd packed what they could fit in the Buick and left. At first, they stayed in cheap motels, the kind that charged by the week and didn't ask questions. But money ran out fast when you're living on Social Security that barely covered food. They tried a shelter, but it was full, and the waiting list stretched months. They slept in Walmart parking lots, truck stops, anywhere that felt semi-safe. Tonight, the cold had driven them to desperation. Merritt had remembered the old Riverside Steel Works on the eastern edge of town, the factory where he'd worked briefly in his 20s before moving on to better opportunities. It had closed in 1987, the same year as their Buick, shut down after some financial scandal that Merritt never fully understood. The place had sat abandoned ever since, a rusting monument to a town's industrial past. People said it was dangerous, unstable, haunted even. But dangerous and haunted beat freezing to death in a car. Merritt turned to Cordelia, her face barely visible in the darkness. "You ready?" She nodded, pulling the blankets tighter around her shoulders. "Together," she whispered. They'd said that word to each other 1,000 times over 5 decades. Together through Merritt's father's funeral. Together through Imogen's difficult birth. Together through the year Cordelia's sewing business nearly went under. Together through it all. And now, together, they would face whatever waited inside that factory. The wind howled as they stepped out of the car, snow swirling in frantic circles under the broken streetlight. The factory loomed before them, a massive skeleton of steel and concrete, its windows shattered like broken teeth, its walls streaked with rust that looked like dried blood in the dim light. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but time and vandals had torn holes large enough to walk through. Merritt carried a duffel bag with their remaining possessions, some clothes, Cordelia's sewing kit, his old toolbox, a few photographs, and a thermos of lukewarm coffee. Cordelia held a flashlight they'd bought at a dollar store, its beam weak but better than nothing. They found an entrance through a side door that hung crooked on its hinges. The interior was vast and empty, the kind of emptiness that echoes. Their footsteps crunched on broken glass and debris. Pigeons scattered in the rafters above, their wings creating whispers that sounded almost like voices. The smell was overwhelming. Rust, mold, decay, and something else, something chemical that made Cordelia's nose wrinkle. "This way," Merritt said, leading them deeper into the facility. His voice sounded small in the cavernous space. They passed what had once been the main production floor. Massive machines sat silent and dead, their purposes long forgotten. Conveyor belts hung at odd angles. Graffiti covered the walls, some of it artistic, most of it just names and curses left by teenagers looking for thrills. Cordelia shivered, and Merritt put his arm around her. "We'll find somewhere warmer," he promised. They climbed a metal staircase to the second level, testing each step before putting their full weight on it. Up here, the factory offices remained relatively intact. Doors still hung on some of the frames. Desks sat overturned but present. Filing cabinets rusted in corners. Merritt pushed open a door marked Maintenance Supervisor and shone the flashlight inside. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, with a single broken window that faced east. But it had walls, a door that closed, and most importantly, it was on the interior side of the building, protected from the worst of the wind. "This'll work," he said. They set up camp as best they could. Merritt used old newspapers and cardboard he'd collected from dumpsters to cover the broken window. Cordelia spread out their blankets on the floor, creating a makeshift bed. They ate a cold dinner of crackers and canned tuna, using Merritt's pocket knife as their only utensil. As they ate in silence, Cordelia's mind drifted back to better times. She remembered the day they'd bought the house on Maple Avenue. She was 24, Merritt was 27, and they had Dalton as a toddler balanced on Merritt's hip. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper, which was generous. The porch sagged, the kitchen was avocado green, and the bathroom had tile from the 1940s, but it was theirs. They'd painted every room together, Cordelia choosing colors while Merritt rolled the paint onto walls. They'd planted a garden that first spring, tomatoes and cucumbers and Cordelia's prized roses. They'd built a life there, inch by inch, year by year, and now it belonged to someone else, some investment company that had bought it at auction. She wondered if the new owners had kept her roses. She wondered if they knew that the third step on the front porch creaked, or that the kitchen window stuck in humid weather, or that if you stood in the backyard at sunset in July, you could see the most beautiful pink and orange sky. She wondered if houses remembered the people who loved them. "Penny for your thoughts," Merritt said softly, breaking her reverie. Cordelia smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just thinking about the roses." Merritt nodded. He didn't need her to explain. "We'll plant roses again someday," he said. "Somewhere." She wanted to believe him, but belief felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. "How did we get here, Merritt? How did we raise children who could do this to us?" It was the question that haunted them both. They'd been good parents, hadn't they? They'd attended every school play, every baseball game, every piano recital. They'd helped with homework, taught their children to drive, paid for Imogene's nursing school when she couldn't get loans. They'd loaned Dalton money to start his real estate business. They'd let Lowell live with them rent-free for 3 years when he couldn't keep a job. Where had they gone wrong? Merritt didn't have an answer. "I don't know, Delia. I really don't know." They finished eating in silence, then curled up together under the blankets. The floor was hard and cold, even through the cardboard they'd laid down. Outside, the wind screamed through the broken windows of the factory, creating an eerie symphony of whistles and moans. Cordelia pressed closer to Merritt, drawing warmth from his body. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will." Within the shelter of his arms, she finally fell into an uneasy sleep. Merritt stayed awake longer, staring at the ceiling he could barely see in the darkness. His mind wouldn't quiet. He kept replaying moments from the past 2 years, looking for the signs he'd missed. When had concern become control? When had help become theft? When had his children stopped seeing him as their father and started seeing him as an obstacle to overcome? He thought about Dalton's expensive car, the one he'd bought last year, about the vacation Imogen had taken to Hawaii, about the new television Lowell had somehow afforded. Had any of that been purchased with money stolen from his and Cordelia's accounts? The anger rose in his chest, hot and bitter. But beneath the anger was something worse. Grief. He was grieving his children as if they had died because in a way they had. The children he'd raised, the ones he'd taught to fish and to be honest and to treat people with dignity, those children were gone. In their place were strangers who wore familiar faces and spoke with voices he'd once read bedtime stories to. But their hearts had turned to something he didn't recognize. He'd read once that the opposite of love wasn't hate, it was indifference. His children had looked at his and Cordelia's suffering and felt nothing. That indifference was the sharpest knife of all. Morning came slowly, grey light creeping through the gaps in their makeshift window covering. Merritt woke first, his back aching from the hard floor. He'd slept in worse places during his stint in the army back in the 1960s, but he'd been young then, resilient. At 76, his body complained about everything. He stretched carefully, trying not to wake Cordelia, and stood up. His knees popped like firecrackers. Through the crack in the covered window, he could see snow still falling, gentler now but steady. They'd need to find water today, and food. The crackers wouldn't last much longer. He opened the office door quietly and stepped into the hallway. In the daylight, such as it was, the factory looked different. Less menacing, more sad. This place had once employed hundreds of people. Merritt walked slowly down the corridor, his footsteps echoing. He passed office after office, each one a frozen moment in time. Papers still sat on desks, yellowed and water-damaged. Calendars hung on walls, forever stopped at October 1987. Coffee mugs, now homes for spiders, sat on filing cabinets, personal photos curled in broken frames. In one office, he found a jacket hanging on a coat rack, as if its owner had simply stepped out for lunch and never returned. The nameplate on the desk read, Bernard Whitmore, Production Manager. Merritt wondered what had happened to Bernard. Had he found another job when the factory closed? Had he retired? Was he even still alive? The factory closure had devastated the town. Hundreds of families lost their primary income. The ripple effects had shuttered businesses, emptied houses, and turned a thriving community into something diminished. Merritt had been lucky back then. He'd already moved on to another job, something more stable. But he remembered the faces of the men he'd worked with briefly at Riverside Steel, good men with families and mortgages and dreams. He wondered how many of them had lost everything when this place shut down. There had been rumors about the closure, whispers of embezzlement and corruption, executives who disappeared before they could face justice. But rumors were all they'd been, and eventually people stopped talking about it. He continued exploring, partly out of curiosity, partly out of necessity. They needed to know the layout of this place if they were going to survive here for any length of time. The factory was enormous, a sprawling complex of production floors, offices, storage areas, and maintenance sections. As he walked, he started to notice things with his machinist's eye, details that didn't quite fit. There were structural reinforcements in odd places, walls that seemed thicker than necessary, floor plans that didn't quite make sense. In the main production area, he found old equipment that hadn't been stripped for scrap, which was unusual. Abandoned factories were usually picked clean by salvagers looking to sell metal. But Riverside Steel Works still had most of its machinery intact, rusted and broken, but present. It was as if everyone had simply walked away and never looked back. There was something deliberate about that abandonment, something that felt intentional. He was probably just being paranoid, reading patterns into randomness because his mind needed something to focus on besides his own troubles. He returned to the maintenance supervisor's office to find Cordelia awake, refolding their blankets with the same careful precision she'd used to fold laundry for 5 decades. "Good morning," she said, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Morning, Delia. How'd you sleep?" She gave him a look that said everything. Not well, but well enough. "I was thinking," she said, "we should explore more today. If we're going to be here for a while, we need to know what resources are available. Maybe there's running water somewhere, or at least a water source we could use." Merritt nodded. "I was thinking the same thing. I already did a quick walk-through. The place is bigger than I remembered." They ate a meager breakfast of crackers and shared the last of the coffee from the thermos. Then, bundled in their layers of insufficient clothing, they began a systematic exploration of their new temporary home. They started on the 2nd floor, checking each office, each storage room, each bathroom. The bathrooms were dry, the pipes long since drained to prevent freezing. In one storage closet, they found cleaning supplies, decades old but possibly still useful. In another, they discovered a stash of old factory uniforms, the kind workers wore in the 80s, heavy cotton work shirts and pants. "These might be warmer than what we have," Cordelia said, holding up a shirt. It was massive, designed for a man much larger than either of them, but fabric was fabric, and warmth was warmth. They took several uniforms back to their office. On the third floor, they found what had been the administrative offices, the executive suite. Here, the furniture was nicer, the desks were real wood instead of metal, and the chairs had once been leather before time and moisture had cracked them into fragments. In the corner office, the one with windows overlooking the whole facility, they found a nameplate that read James Kessler, Chief Financial Officer. The office was largely intact. The desk was huge, mahogany maybe, though it was hard to tell under the layer of grime. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A bookshelf held rotting management texts and binders. Cordelia moved to the window, wiping away decades of dirt with her sleeve. The view was haunting. From up here she could see the entire factory complex sprawling below, a maze of buildings and equipment slowly being reclaimed by nature. In the distance, beyond the factory fence, she could see the town. Smoke rose from chimneys. Cars moved on distant streets. Life continued out there, ordinary and warm, while she and Merritt existed in this frozen bubble of abandonment. "Delia, come look at this," Merritt called. He was standing by the filing cabinets, one drawer pulled open. Inside were files, surprisingly well preserved thanks to the cabinet's seal. He pulled one out at random and opened it. Financial records, production reports, shipping manifests, all from 1987. Why would they leave all this? Cordelia wondered. Merritt shook his head. They shouldn't have. When a company closes, especially with the kind of scandal that surrounded this place, everything should be seized as evidence or archived. He pulled out another file, then another. All of them were related to the final months of the factory's operation. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a production report dated September 1987. "Says they produced 12,000 units that month. But this shipping manifest from the same month only shows 8,000 units shipped." Cordelia frowned. Where did the other 4,000 go? Good question. They spent the next hour going through files, and the discrepancies were everywhere. Production numbers that didn't match shipping numbers, equipment purchases that seemed excessive, payments to companies that, when Merritt checked the old phone book they found, didn't seem to exist. "Someone was stealing from this place," Merritt said finally. "Stealing big." Cordelia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. And they never got caught. Maybe they did. Maybe that's why they shut down so fast. Maybe that's why everything's still here, crime scene sealed and forgotten. But if it was a crime scene, it had been a remarkably unguarded one for 37 years. They left the executive office and continued their exploration. The first floor held the main production equipment, the massive machines that had once shaped steel into whatever components the factory produced. In the northwest corner, they found the old cafeteria, tables and chairs still arranged as if waiting for workers who would never return. The kitchen was stripped, anything valuable long since taken, but the structure remained. It was in the northeast corner, in what appeared to be a maintenance area, that they found the room that would change everything. It was partially hidden behind a rack of old tools, easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully. The door was heavy, industrial grade, and it took both of them pulling together to get it open. Inside was a workspace, cleaner than it should have been. The air in here felt different, drier, as if this room had been better sealed than the rest of the facility. There were workbenches, tool chests, and in the center of the room, a floor panel that caught Cordelia's eye. It was subtle, but wrong. The panel was the same industrial gray as the rest of the floor, but the seams around it were too clean, too precise. The other floor panels in the factory were dinged and stained and irregular. This one looked maintained. "Merritt," she said quietly, "look at this." He came over, knelt down with a grunt, and ran his fingers along the seams. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "This is new. I mean, newer. This was cut and fitted long after this place was built." He pulled his flashlight from his pocket and shone it along the edges. "See here, the concrete around it has been patched, and these bolt holes, they're clean. This panel's been opened before, probably regularly." Cordelia's heart began to beat faster. "What do you think is down there?" Merritt looked up at her, his eyes reflecting her own mixture of fear and curiosity. Only one way to find out. But the sun was already setting, the winter days brutally short. They'd been exploring for hours, and both of them were exhausted, hungry, and cold. "Tomorrow," Merritt said, standing up with effort. "We'll open it tomorrow. Tonight, let's get back to our room and warm up as best we can." Cordelia nodded, but as they made their way back through the darkening factory, she couldn't stop thinking about that floor panel. All evening, as they ate their meager dinner and tried to get comfortable for another night on the hard floor, her mind kept returning to it. What could be under there? Storage? Utility access? Or something else? Something that explained why this factory felt more like a tomb than a ruin. Beside her, Merritt fell asleep quickly, exhaustion overcoming discomfort. But Cordelia lay awake, listening to the wind howl through the broken windows and the factory's strange nighttime sounds. Somewhere in the distance, metal creaked against metal. Water dripped with rhythmic persistence, and beneath it all, she could swear she heard something else. Something that might have been machinery or might have been her imagination, a low hum coming from deep below. She thought about her children out there in the warm houses purchased with stolen money. Did they ever think about their parents? Did they wonder if Merritt and Cordelia were safe or warm or fed? Did guilt ever touch them in quiet moments? Or had they convinced themselves that what they'd done was somehow justified, somehow right? She thought about Imogene's condescending smile. "You're just confused, Mum. It's normal at your age." Rage flared in Cordelia's chest, hot and sudden. She wasn't confused. She wasn't losing her mind. She knew exactly what had been done to them and who had done it. And maybe, just maybe, whatever was under that floor panel would give her and Merritt a chance to fight back. The thought surprised her. She'd never been a vengeful person. She'd spent her whole life being kind, being understanding, turning the other cheek like her mother had taught her. But there was something different about betrayal from your own children. It didn't just hurt. It changed you. It turned something soft inside you into stone. She pulled the blankets tighter around her shoulders and stared at the ceiling she couldn't see. Tomorrow they would open that panel. Tomorrow they would discover what secrets Riverside Steelworks had been hiding for 37 years. And tomorrow, though she didn't know it yet, Cordelia Ashworth would begin the journey from victim to victor, from forgotten to unforgettable. Because sometimes the people who lose everything are the ones who find what the world never knew was missing. Sometimes the people pushed into darkness are the ones who discover the light. Morning came with the kind of pale grey light that barely deserved the name. Merritt woke to find Cordelia already up, sitting cross-legged on their makeshift bed, staring at the wall with an intensity that worried him. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't seen in months: determination. "We're opening that panel today," she said. It wasn't a question. Merritt sat up slowly, his spine protesting every movement. "I figured as much. You were thinking about it all night, weren't you?" "Couldn't stop," she admitted. "Merritt, what if there's something down there that could help us? What if there's evidence of what they did to this factory, to those workers? What if we could finally prove that people like our children don't get to just take everything and walk away?" He understood then that this wasn't just about curiosity anymore. For Cordelia, that floor panel represented possibility. After months of being powerless, of being victims, of having their lives stripped away piece by piece, here was something they could control. Here was something they could choose to open, to investigate, to act upon. They ate the last of their crackers for breakfast, washing them down with snow melted in an old coffee can they'd found. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then, with their flashlights and Merritt's toolbox, they made their way through the frozen factory to the maintenance room. In daylight, such as it was filtering through the grimy windows, the room looked less mysterious but no less intriguing. The floor panel sat exactly as they'd left it, waiting. Merritt set down his toolbox with a metallic thunk that echoed in the empty space. "Let's see what we're working with," he said, kneeling beside the panel. He examined it more carefully now, running his fingers along the edges, testing the bolts. They were industrial grade, hex head, probably 3/4 inch. Someone had wanted this sealed tight but accessible. He pulled a socket wrench from his toolbox and selected the right size. The first bolt resisted, rusted into place by decades of moisture and time. Merritt applied steady pressure, and finally it gave with a shriek of metal on metal that made Cordelia jump. "Sorry," he muttered. "Should have warned you." One by one he removed the bolts, 8 of them in total, arranged around the perimeter of the panel. With each one, Cordelia felt her heart beat faster. This was it. Whatever was down there, whatever secrets Riverside Steelworks had been hiding, they were about to uncover them. The final bolt came free, and Merritt set down his wrench. He looked up at Cordelia. "You ready?" She nodded. Together, they gripped the edges of the panel and lifted. It was heavier than expected, solid steel, but between the two of them they managed to slide it aside with a grinding scrape. Beneath was darkness and a hole approximately 4 feet square. Merritt shone his flashlight down. The beam revealed concrete walls and the top of a metal staircase descending into shadow. The stairs looked industrial, the kind made from steel grating that you could see through. They appeared solid, well-maintained even, which made no sense for an abandoned factory. "There's air moving," Cordelia said, holding her hand over the opening. "Feel that? It's warmer down there." Merritt felt it too, a gentle current of air that was noticeably warmer than the frigid factory around them. That meant ventilation, which meant power, which meant someone had kept this place operational long after the factory closed. "I'll go first," Merritt said. "If anything feels unstable, I'll come right back up." Cordelia grabbed his arm. "We go together. We've done everything else together. We're not stopping now." He smiled despite his nervousness. "Together, then." Merritt descended first, testing each step carefully before putting his full weight on it. The stairs were solid, no wobble, no rust, maintained just like the floor panel above. Cordelia followed close behind, one hand on his shoulder, the other holding her flashlight. The stairwell was narrow, claustrophobic, descending what felt like 20 feet or more. At the bottom, they stepped onto another concrete floor. Merritt swept his flashlight around, and both of them gasped. They were standing in a corridor, roughly 8 feet wide, that stretched into darkness in both directions. The walls were smooth concrete, painted industrial white, though yellowed with age, and running along the ceiling, still functioning, were LED lights. Not bright, but enough to create a dim glow that pushed back the darkness. "Those lights are on," Cordelia whispered. "Someone's been paying the electric bill for 37 years?" Merritt moved forward slowly, Cordelia right beside him. The corridor was clean, far cleaner than anything above. No debris, no graffiti, no signs of water damage. Their footsteps echoed strangely, absorbed by the concrete and the weight of earth above them. They chose the left direction arbitrarily and walked. After about 30 feet, the corridor opened into a room. And what a room it was! Merritt stopped so suddenly that Cordelia bumped into him. "Oh my God," he breathed. The space was enormous, easily 60 feet by 40 feet, with a ceiling at least 12 feet high, and it was filled with steel cases, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They were stacked neatly on industrial shelving units that ran in rows like a warehouse. Each case was approximately 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and a foot deep, made from brushed steel with heavy-duty latches. The LED lights here were brighter, revealing every detail with stark clarity. And in the center of the room sat a large metal desk with a chair, looking for all the world like someone had just stepped away for lunch. Cordelia found her voice first. "What is this place?" Merritt moved toward the nearest case, his hands trembling. The case had a number stenciled on it in white paint, 001. The latches opened easily, not locked, just secured. He lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in clear plastic, were stacks of money. Not just a few bills, but bundles, each one neatly bound with paper bands. $100 bills, thousands of them. Cordelia made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp, wasn't quite a sob. Merritt stared at the money like it might disappear if he blinked. With shaking hands, he pulled out one bundle. The band around it read $10,000, First National Bank, and the bills felt real, old but real. "How much do you think is in there?" Cordelia whispered. Merritt did quick math in his head. If each bundle was 10,000, and there looked to be maybe 50 bundles per case, that was $500,000 per case. He looked around at the shelving units, started counting cases. His count kept getting interrupted by disbelief, by the sheer impossibility of what he was seeing. "Delia," he said, his voice hollow. "I think there's at least 200 cases in here. 500,000 times 200, $100 million, but that wasn't all. Along the back wall, separate from the shelving units, stood even larger containers. These were more like footlockers, maybe a dozen of them, each one roughly 4 feet long and 2 feet deep. Merritt walked toward them as if in a trance. The first footlocker was unlocked. Inside were more bundles of cash, but these were different denominations. 50s, 20s, even some older bills that looked like they were from the 1970s and 80s. He didn't even try to count. He just closed it and opened the next one. Same thing. Money, endless money, carefully packaged and preserved. Cordelia sank into the chair at the desk, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. She put her face in her hands. Merritt turned to her, concern cutting through his shock. "Delia." She looked up, and tears were streaming down her face. "We've been sleeping on a concrete floor, eating crackers, freezing, and all this time we've been sleeping 20 feet above more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. The absurdity of it, the cruel cosmic joke of it, hit them both simultaneously. They started laughing, the kind of laughter that borders on hysteria, the kind that comes when reality becomes too strange to process any other way. When the laughter finally subsided, Merritt noticed the desk more carefully. It wasn't empty. There were papers here, documents protected by plastic sleeves and organized in binders. He picked up the first binder and opened it. Inside was a typed manifest, dated October 15, 1987, just 2 weeks before the factory closed. It listed account numbers, transfer amounts, and locations. Riverside Steelworks Pension Fund, it read at the top. Unauthorized withdrawals. Merritt felt his stomach turn. He opened another binder. This one contained what looked like financial records, ledgers showing money moving from legitimate accounts into offshore holdings. Cordelia stood and moved beside him, reading over his shoulder. "They stole from the pension fund," she said quietly. "All those workers who lost everything when this place closed. It wasn't just bad management. Someone was stealing their retirement money." Merritt flipped through more pages. The amounts were staggering. Over the course of several years, someone had been systematically embezzling from every account the factory held. Pension funds, operating capital, equipment budgets, even the employee health insurance fund. All of it funneled away through a complex series of transfers and shell companies. At the bottom of the binder was a handwritten note on Riverside Steel Works letterhead. Vault secure, total assets concealed, $320,400,000, plan to retrieve upon statute of limitations, JK. $320 million. The number was so large it barely meant anything. Merritt had to read it 3 times before his brain would accept it. Cordelia pointed to the initials. JK, James Kessler, the CFO. We saw his office upstairs. Merritt nodded slowly. He stole over $300 million from this factory, from the workers, from the town. Then he hid it here, probably planning to come back for it once enough time had passed that he couldn't be prosecuted. But he never came back, Cordelia said. Why? Merritt found another document, this one a newspaper clipping in a plastic sleeve. The headline read, "Former CFO dies in boating accident." The article was dated April 1988, just 6 months after the factory closed. James Kessler, age 52, had drowned when his boat capsized during a fishing trip. His body had been recovered 3 days later. He died, Merritt said. He hid all this money and died before he could retrieve it. Cordelia sat back down, her mind racing. So for 37 years, this money has been sitting here. Hundreds of families lost their pensions, their savings, their futures, and the money that was stolen from them has been locked in a basement, doing nothing, helping no one. The injustice of it burned in her chest. She thought of the workers she'd known, friends and neighbors who'd worked at Riverside Steel. There was Marcus and his wife, who'd lost their house. There was Patricia, who'd had to work until she was 78 because her pension disappeared. There was Thomas, who'd died 5 years after the closure, stress and heartbreak aging him decades in months. All of them had suffered while their stolen money sat pristine in plastic wrap beneath their feet. Merritt pulled out his phone, an old flip model that barely worked. No signal down here, not surprisingly. He looked at Cordelia. What do we do? It was the question that mattered. They were homeless, penniless, betrayed by their own children, and living in an abandoned factory. They'd just discovered enough money to solve every problem they had 100 times over. Taking even a single case would change their lives completely. They could rent an apartment, buy food, get warm clothes, maybe even hire a lawyer to go after Dalton, Imogene, and Lowell for what they'd done. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Cordelia stood and walked along the rows of cases, her fingers trailing across the cool steel. Merritt, do you remember when Tommy Baker came to us asking for help? Merritt nodded. Tommy had been a young mechanic who'd gotten in over his head with gambling debts. This was back in the 90s when they still had money, when life was stable. He needed $5,000 or some very bad people were going to hurt him. We gave it to him, even though we didn't really have it to spare. We took it from our vacation fund. I remember, Merritt said. And he paid us back every penny, even though we told him he didn't have to. Cordelia turned to face her husband. Why did we help him? Merritt understood what she was asking. Because it was the right thing to do. Because when you can help someone, you should. Exactly, Cordelia said. We've always tried to do the right thing, even when it cost us, even when it was hard. That's who we are. She gestured at the money surrounding them. This isn't ours. It never will be. This belongs to the people it was stolen from. Merritt felt relief flood through him. He'd been thinking the same thing but had been afraid to say it, afraid Cordelia would think he was foolish for even considering turning down this life-saving fortune. You're right, he said. You're absolutely right. But Delia, we can't just leave it here. We can't walk away and pretend we never found it. Those workers deserve to know their money has been found. Cordelia smiled. The first real smile he'd seen on her face in months. Then we call the authorities. We tell them what we found. We make sure this gets back to the people it belongs to. But even as she said it, practical concerns crept in. Merritt, we're homeless. We have no credibility. What if they don't believe us? What if they think we're just crazy old people? Merritt thought about that. She was right. If two elderly homeless people walked into a police station claiming they'd found over $300 million in an abandoned factory, they'd be laughed out of the building. Or worse, someone might try to take advantage of them, might try to steal the discovery for themselves. We need proof, he said. We need documentation, and we need to be smart about this. They spent the next several hours going through the desk. In the drawers they found more binders, each one meticulously organized. There were account statements showing where the money had come from. There were lists of workers whose pensions had been raided. There were letters between James Kessler and his co-conspirators, discussing how to hide the theft, how to time the factory closure, how to disappear the evidence. It was all here, a complete record of financial crime spanning years. He kept everything, Cordelia said in amazement. Every piece of evidence that could convict him, he kept it all. Merritt understood why. He needed it to access the money later, needed to know which accounts to return it to, how to launder it, how to make it legitimate again. This was his insurance policy. They found a printer in the corner of the room, covered with plastic to protect it from moisture. Merritt tried it, not expecting it to work, but after a moment of grinding, it hummed to life. Someone had really kept the power running down here all these years, probably automated payments from one of Kessler's hidden accounts. They began printing. Every manifest, every ledger entry, every piece of evidence they could find. The printer was old and slow, but it worked. While Merritt handled the documents, Cordelia explored the rest of the underground complex. There were more rooms. One appeared to be a small living quarters with a cot and supplies. Kessler must have spent time down here, organizing his theft, hiding his fortune. Another room held what looked like ventilation equipment, massive fans and filters that explained the air circulation. A third room was locked, heavy steel door with a keypad that was long dead. She returned to the main vault where Merritt had created a stack of printed documents nearly 3 inches thick. "This is it," he said. "This is everything we need. Account numbers, names, amounts, dates. Any forensic accountant could trace this money back to its sources." Cordelia picked up one of the sheets, scanning the names. She recognized some of them. Harold Jenkins lost his house. Maria Rodriguez had to put her mother in a cheaper nursing home. Curtis Freeman died of stress-induced heart attack at age 59. These weren't just names on paper. These were people, friends, neighbors, families destroyed by greed. "We should take some money," Merritt said quietly. Cordelia looked at him sharply. "I thought we agreed." "Hear me out," he said. "If we go to the authorities with nothing, we look desperate. We look like we have motive to make this up. But if we walk in with, say, $5,000 and we say we found it and want to return it, but we think there's more, that's different. That's evidence. That's proof we're telling the truth." Cordelia considered this. He was right. They needed to establish credibility, and $5,000 out of $320 million was nothing, a rounding error. "Okay," she agreed, "but just enough to prove we found something, nothing more." Merritt opened the nearest case again and pulled out a single bundle. $10,000. He hesitated, then put back half the stack. 5,000, he counted carefully. It felt wrong handling stolen money, even if their intentions were pure. They packaged the documents carefully in a plastic bag they found. Then Cordelia had another thought. "We need photographs, proof of what's down here in case something happens to us." Merritt's phone had a camera, primitive by modern standards but functional. They spent the next hour photographing everything, The cases of money, the documents, the room itself, the stairs leading down. Cordelia even insisted they take photographs of themselves standing in the vault, establishing that they were really here, that this was real. When they finally climbed back up the metal staircase, the winter sun was already beginning its early descent toward the horizon. They'd been underground for most of the day. Merritt replaced the floor panel carefully, bolting it back into place. They stood in the maintenance room, looking at each other, holding evidence of the biggest financial crime their town had ever seen. "Now what?" Cordelia asked. "Now we find a way to contact someone who can help us, someone who won't dismiss us, someone who has the authority to investigate this properly." But who? They had no phone service, no computer, no way to research attorneys or law enforcement officials who might believe them. And they were still homeless, still cold, still hungry. That night, back in their maintenance supervisor's office, they ate a dinner of beef jerky and peanut butter crackers that Merritt had bought from a gas station using the last few dollars he'd had in his wallet. They couldn't spend the $5,000 they'd taken, not yet. It was evidence. As they ate, they planned. "We need to get to the county seat," Merritt said. "There's a federal building there, FBI, DEA, probably other agencies. We bring them the documents, tell them the story, let them verify it." "That's 40 miles, Cordelia pointed out. "The Buick barely has enough gas to make it 10. Merritt nodded. That was the problem. They'd found $300 million but couldn't afford the gas to report it. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "We could try to find a phone," Cordelia suggested. "Call the FBI from here." "And say what?" "Hi, we're homeless people living in an abandoned factory, and we found $300 million in the basement. Come check it out." They'd think it was a prank. Cordelia sighed. He was right. This needed to be done in person, with evidence in hand, with the ability to lead investigators directly to the vault. They needed credibility, and credibility required presentation. "We'll figure something out," she said finally. "We always do." That night, Cordelia lay awake again, but this time her thoughts were different. Before, she'd been consumed by grief and anger over what her children had done. Now, she was consumed by purpose. They had stumbled onto something important, something that could help people who'd been hurt the same way she and Merritt had been hurt. It felt like fate or providence, or maybe just the universe balancing its books. They'd lost everything to theft and betrayal. Now they'd discovered the evidence of theft and betrayal on a scale that dwarfed their own suffering. Maybe this was why they'd ended up here, in this factory, on this night. Maybe there was purpose in the pain. Beside her, Merritt slept fitfully, his breathing ragged from the cold. She worried about him. He was 76, living in conditions no one his age should endure. His arthritis was getting worse, his back giving him constant pain. She was afraid that if they didn't get out of here soon, if they didn't get somewhere warm, the cold might take him from her. But now they had options. They could sell the Buick for gas money. They could pawn Cordelia's wedding ring, the one thing their children hadn't managed to steal. They could find a way. She reached out in the darkness and found Merritt's hand, lacing her fingers through his. His skin was rough and cold, but his grip was strong. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow they would begin the journey to make this right, not just for themselves, but for everyone who'd been hurt by James Kessler's greed, for Harold and Maria and Curtis and all the others whose names filled those documents. The next morning brought a development they hadn't anticipated. Merritt was exploring a different section of the factory, looking for anything useful, when he found an old office with a landline phone still plugged into the wall. On a whim, he picked it up. To his shock, there was a dial tone. The phone still worked. He rushed back to Cordelia. "We can make a call. There's a working phone." They went together to the office. Cordelia held the printed documents while Merritt picked up the receiver. But who to call? They didn't know any lawyers. They didn't have the number for the FBI memorized. Directory assistance, Merritt thought. That still existed, didn't it? He dialed 411. After a moment, an automated voice answered. Merritt asked for the number to the Federal Bureau of Investigation county office. The system connected him. The phone rang 3 times before a professional voice answered. FBI, how may I direct your call? Merritt took a deep breath. My name is Merritt Ashworth. I'm calling to report a found theft of over $300 million. There was a pause. Sir, did you say $300 million? Yes, ma'am. Stolen from Riverside Steelworks in 1987. I have documentation, evidence, and I can show you where the money is hidden. Another pause, longer this time. Sir, can you hold, please? The line went quiet. Merritt looked at Cordelia. They're transferring me, or checking if I'm crazy. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, a new voice came on the line. Male, deeper, authoritative. This is Special Agent Crawford. You're reporting found stolen money. Yes, sir. My wife and we've been staying in the old Riverside Steelworks building. We found a hidden vault beneath the factory floor. It's filled with cash and documents showing embezzlement from the factory's pension funds and operating accounts. And you said over $300 million. $320 million, according to the documents left by the man who stole it. James Kessler, he was the CFO. He hid it all before the factory closed, then died in a boating accident before he could retrieve it. It's all documented. I have printouts. Agent Crawford was quiet for a moment. Mr. Ashworth, this is quite a claim. You understand we get calls like this sometimes, and they usually don't pan out. I understand, Merritt said. That's why I'm offering to show you. Come to the factory. I'll take you directly to the vault. Bring whoever you need to verify it. I just want this money returned to the people it was stolen from. Something in Merritt's voice must have convinced him. Give me the address. Merritt provided the location of Riverside Steelworks. Agent Crawford said, We'll have someone there in 2 hours. Will you wait for us? We're not going anywhere, Merritt said. We live here. He said it without shame because there was no shame in surviving, only in stealing. 2 hours later, they heard vehicles approaching. Merritt and Cordelia had cleaned themselves up as best they could, changed into the cleanest clothes they had, and waited by the main entrance with their documentation. 3 black SUVs pulled up. Men in suits and windbreakers marked FBI emerged, along with what looked like forensic accountants carrying equipment cases. Agent Crawford was in his 40s, tall and professional, with kind eyes that reminded Cordelia of her father. He approached them carefully, taking in their obvious poverty, the cold, the factory behind them. Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth? Yes, sir, Merritt said, extending his hand. Crawford shook it firmly. Thank you for calling this in. Before we proceed, I need to ask, are either of you injured or in need of medical attention? It was a considerate question. Cordelia appreciated it. We're cold and hungry, but we're okay. Crawford nodded to one of his colleagues who went back to an SUV and returned with blankets and bottles of water. The simple kindness of it, being treated like human beings rather than inconveniences, nearly broke Cordelia's composure. Now, Crawford said, show us what you found. Merritt led them through the factory to the maintenance room. The FBI agents looked around with professional assessment, noting the decay, the danger, the impossible conditions. When they reached the floor panel, Merritt said, Everything I told you is under there. I'll need my tools to open it. Crawford nodded. Merritt removed the bolts again, the process faster this time since they'd already been loosened once. When the panel came free, revealing the stairwell and the faint glow of LED lights below, the agents exchanged glances. This was real. They descended, the agents going first now, flashlights out despite the functioning lights. When they reached the vault, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then Agent Crawford breathed, Holy Mother of God. The forensic accountants immediately began taking photographs, documenting everything. One of them opened a case, pulled out a bundle of money and examined it closely. "These are real," he said. "Old, but real. And these serial numbers, they're sequential, consistent with bulk withdrawals." Cordelia handed Crawford the documents they'd printed. "It's all here. Who he stole from, how much, when, account numbers, routing information, everything." Crawford flipped through the pages, his expression growing more serious with each one. This is extraordinary. Mrs. Ashworth, do you realize what you've found? This is one of the biggest recovered thefts in state history." "We realize," she said quietly. "We also realize it belongs to people who had their lives destroyed. Can you get it back to them?" Crawford looked at her with respect. "We'll do everything in our power. There's a process, but yes, pension funds can be restored, claims can be filed. This will change lives." Merritt felt something loosen in his chest, tension he'd been carrying since the moment they found the vault. They'd done it. They'd done the right thing. Over the next several hours, the FBI documented everything. They photographed, catalogued, and began the process of securing the money as evidence. They interviewed Merritt and Cordelia extensively, recording every detail of how they'd found the vault, what they'd touched, what they'd removed. When Cordelia produced the $5,000 they'd taken, Agent Crawford smiled. "You took this as proof." "We took it because we needed credibility," Merritt explained. "We knew no one would believe homeless people without evidence." Crawford carefully logged the money as voluntarily returned. "For the record, finder's fees exist in cases like this. You may be entitled to a percentage." Cordelia shook her head. "We don't want a percentage. We just want to know the people who were hurt by this will be made whole." Crawford studied them for a long moment. "You're remarkable people." As evening fell, Agent Crawford approached them with blankets from the SUVs. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth, we can't let you stay here tonight. It's not safe, and frankly, it's unconscionable after what you've done for these victims. We're going to set you up in a hotel on the bureau while we process this scene." Cordelia's eyes filled with tears. A hotel, a warm bed, a shower. It seemed impossible. We can't," she started. "It's handled," Crawford said gently. "And tomorrow, I'm going to personally connect you with social services. What happened to you, what your children did, that's elder abuse and fraud. We're going to help you address that too." Merritt put his arm around Cordelia as she wept. They weren't just being heard, they were being helped. That night, in a modest but clean hotel room with heating that worked and beds that were soft, Merritt and Cordelia sat together by the window watching the snow fall. They'd showered until the water ran clear. They'd eaten hot food brought by sympathetic agents. They'd called Agent Crawford's office and learned that the story was already breaking in the news. Pensioners from Riverside Steelworks were being contacted. The money was real. Restoration was beginning. "We did it," Cordelia whispered. "We actually did it." Merritt kissed her forehead. "We did. And Delia, Crawford said something interesting. He said our story, what happened with our kids, it matters. He wants us to talk to an attorney about pressing charges." Cordelia had been thinking about that. Dalton, Imogen, and Lowell had stolen their lives. They'd betrayed trust, forged documents, committed fraud. Did they deserve prosecution? Yes, she decided. Yes, they did. Not for revenge, but for accountability. Because some actions have consequences, even when the victims are your parents. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow we'll deal with that. Tonight, let's just be grateful we're alive, we're together, and we've helped people who needed it." Outside, the snow continued to fall on the forgotten factory that had held its secrets for 37 years. Inside a warm hotel room, two people who'd lost everything had found something more valuable than money. They'd found purpose, dignity, and proof that choosing what's right over what's easy can change the world. The morning after their first night in the hotel, Merritt woke to find Cordelia already dressed, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee she'd made from the room's small pot. The sun was barely up, painting the sky in shades of pearl and rose. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, sitting up. She turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I slept better than I have in months. But Merritt, I keep thinking about what Agent Crawford said, about pressing charges against the kids." Merritt joined her by the window, accepting the second cup of coffee she'd poured for him. "Having second thoughts?" Cordelia was quiet for a long moment. "They're still our children. Somewhere inside those people who stole from us are the babies I nursed, the toddlers who held my hand crossing streets, the teenagers who came to us with broken hearts." She paused, her fingers tightening around the warm mug. "But they looked me in the eye and told me I was confused. They took our home, they left us to freeze, and they never looked back." "So what do you want to do?" Merritt asked gently. She met his eyes. "I want them to face what they did. Not because I hate them, but because if they don't face consequences, they'll do it to someone else. Some other elderly parent who trusts them. Some other family who believes love protects you from your own children." Merritt nodded slowly. "Then we press charges. We tell the truth, and whatever happens, happens." By 9 that morning, they had a visitor. Agent Crawford arrived with a woman in her early 30s, dressed professionally, but with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth, this is Thessaly Nguyen. She's with the Legal Aid Society, specializes in elder law and fraud cases. I took the liberty of asking her to meet with you." Thessaly shook their hands firmly. "I've already heard about what you've been through and what you've discovered. I'd like to help you if you'll have me." They sat in the hotel room's small seating area, and Thessaly pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." For the next 2 hours, Merritt and Cordelia recounted their story. Thessaly took notes, asked questions, and occasionally shook her head in disgust. When they finished, she set down her pen. "What your children did is textbook elder financial abuse. The power of attorney manipulation, the forged signatures, the reverse mortgage, all of it is prosecutable. But I need to be honest with you. These cases are hard to win. Families often rally around the accused. Juries sometimes don't want to believe children would do this to their parents." "But we have evidence," Cordelia said. "The documents, the bank records." Thessaly nodded. "We do, and that helps immensely. But your children will have attorneys who will argue you were confused, that you consented to everything, that they were helping you manage affairs you couldn't handle anymore." She leaned forward. "Here's what I need to know. Are you prepared for this fight? It's going to be public, painful, and personal. Your children will likely say terrible things about you to defend themselves." Merritt and Cordelia looked at each other. In that glance was 52 years of partnership, of facing hard things together, of surviving. "We're prepared," Merritt said. "Good," Thessaly said. "Then let's start building your case." Over the next week, their lives transformed in ways both wonderful and terrifying. The story of the Riverside Steelworks vault broke nationally. Elderly homeless couple discovers $300 million in stolen pension funds, the headlines read. Merritt and Cordelia's faces appeared on news broadcasts, in papers, online. The response was overwhelming. Former Riverside steelworkers began reaching out, many of them now in their 70s and 80s, like Merritt and Cordelia. There was Gerald, who'd worked the night shift for 23 years and lost his entire pension. There was Ramona, whose husband had died of a stress-induced stroke 6 months after learning his retirement was gone. There was Keith, who'd had to sell his house and move in with his daughter when the money disappeared. One by one, they came forward, and Thessaly documented every case. But with the attention came complications. On the 4th day after the discovery, Merritt's phone rang. It was a number he recognized, Dalton's. His stomach clenched. He almost didn't answer, but Cordelia nodded at him. Thessaly had said they should document all contact with the children. He answered on speaker. "Dad?" Dalton's voice was smooth, concerned, the way it had been when he first offered to help with their finances. Dalton. "Dad, I've been seeing these news stories. Are you okay? Where are you?" The concern sounded genuine. If Merritt didn't know better, he'd believe it. "We're fine, better than we've been in months, actually." A pause. "Dad, some of these articles are saying you're homeless. That can't be true. Why didn't you call us? We would have helped." Cordelia leaned toward the phone. "Like you helped us out of our house, Dalton? Like you helped us out of our savings?" Another pause, longer this time. When Dalton spoke again, the warmth was gone. "Mum, I don't know what you're remembering, but you signed all those documents willingly. You asked for our help. If you're confused now, that's exactly why we were trying to protect you." "We're not confused," Merritt said firmly. "We know exactly what happened, and we have attorneys now. Good ones." The silence on the other end was heavy. "Attorneys? Dad, what are you saying?" "I'm saying we're pressing charges for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse against all three of you." Dalton's voice went cold. "You're making a mistake, a serious mistake. You're not well, either of you. We have doctors who can testify to that. We have documentation of your declining mental state. If you push this, we'll have no choice but to petition the court to have you declared incompetent for your own protection." Cordelia felt ice in her veins. "You're threatening us?" "I'm trying to help you," Dalton said. "Before you embarrass yourselves publicly. Before you make accusations you can't prove. Mom, Dad, please. Let us come get you. We'll take care of everything." Merritt ended the call. His hands were shaking. Thessaly, who'd been listening on another phone, looked grim. "They're going to fight hard. The incompetency threat isn't idle. They'll try to have you declared unfit, get guardianship, control your legal options." She leaned forward. "But here's the thing. You just discovered a $300 million theft, documented it, and reported it to federal authorities. That's not the action of incompetent people. That's actually remarkably competent." 2 days later, they received court papers. Dalton, Imogene, and Lowell had jointly filed a petition for emergency guardianship, claiming Merritt and Cordelia were unable to care for themselves and were making irrational decisions based on delusions. The petition cited their homelessness, their claims about finding money, and alleged that they were being manipulated by opportunistic attorneys. Thessaly read through the filing, her jaw tight. "This is aggressive. They're trying to shut you down before you can file charges against them." "Can they win?" Cordelia asked. "Not if we fight it properly. We need medical evaluations, cognitive tests, anything that proves you're both mentally sound, and we need to move fast on the criminal complaint before they can get guardianship." That afternoon, Thessaly arranged for comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations at a local hospital. Merritt and Cordelia spent hours being examined, tested, questioned. The results were clear. Both were in good mental health, showing no signs of dementia, confusion, or impairment. In fact, the psychologist noted that their recall of events, dates, and details was remarkably sharp. Armed with these evaluations, Thessaly filed an opposition to the guardianship petition and simultaneously filed criminal complaints with the district attorney's office. The evidence was substantial: forged signatures on loan documents, unauthorized account withdrawals, power of attorney abuse, fraudulent reverse mortgage applications. The DA's office opened an investigation immediately, but Dalton, Imogene, and Lowell weren't going quietly. They hired a prominent defense attorney named Marcus Vaughn, known for his aggressive tactics. Vaughn immediately went to the media. "My clients are devastated," he told reporters outside the courthouse. "They spent years caring for their aging parents, managing their affairs, trying to protect them. Now, in a moment of confusion and perhaps desperation, these elderly individuals are making false accusations. It's heartbreaking." He painted Merritt and Cordelia as confused, perhaps senile, certainly unreliable. He suggested their discovery of money was either exaggerated or fabricated. He implied Thessaly and the Legal Aid Society were exploiting vulnerable people for publicity. The counter-narrative began to take hold in some circles. Opinion pieces appeared questioning whether elderly people should be trusted with major decisions. Talk show hosts debated dementia and elder care. Suddenly, Merritt and Cordelia weren't heroes who'd returned stolen money. They were victims of their own declining faculties, being used by lawyers. Cordelia read the articles and felt something harden inside her. "They're doing it again," she told Merritt, "dismissing us, treating us like we're incompetent just because we're old." "But this time we're not alone," Merritt reminded her. He was right. The former Riverside steel workers rallied. Gerald organized a press conference where 20 former employees stood together and vouched for Merritt and Cordelia's character and competence. "I've known Merritt Ashworth for 40 years, Gerald said into the cameras. "He's one of the sharpest men I've ever met. And Cordelia, she remembered my wife's birthday every year for 3 decades. These people aren't confused. They're courageous." Ramona told the story of how the pension theft had destroyed her family. Keith showed documents proving what had been stolen. One by one, they made the case that this wasn't about 2 elderly people's delusions. It was about systematic theft that had devastated hundreds of families. And now, finally, there was justice. The tide began to turn. Thessaly worked 18-hour days, building their case brick by brick. She obtained bank records showing the pattern of withdrawals from Merritt and Cordelia's accounts. She found the forged signatures, hiring a handwriting expert who testified they were crude copies, clearly fake. She tracked down the notary who'd supposedly witnessed documents, only to discover that person had died 3 years before the documents were dated. The evidence was overwhelming. But the guardianship hearing came first, scheduled for 3 weeks after the petition was filed. If Dalton, Imogene, and Lowell won guardianship, they could stop their parents from pursuing criminal charges. They could control medical decisions, legal decisions, every aspect of Merritt and Cordelia's lives. The hearing was held in a small courtroom that was nevertheless packed with people. Former steel workers filled the gallery. Local reporters squeezed into every available space. Agent Crawford sat in the back, there to support the couple who'd done the right thing. Judge Marianne Foster presided, a woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and sharp eyes. Dalton, Imogen, and Lowell sat at the petitioner's table with Marcus Vaughan. They dressed conservatively, looking like concerned children. Imogene dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Lowell's expression was one of pained worry. Dalton sat stone-faced and proper. Across the aisle, Merritt and Cordelia sat with Thessaly. Cordelia had worn the best outfit she owned, salvaged from their car. Merritt had borrowed a tie from Agent Crawford. They looked humble, honest, real. Vaughan presented his case first. He called a doctor who'd briefly treated Merritt for high blood pressure 2 years ago. The doctor testified that while he hadn't seen recent signs of dementia, elderly patients often declined rapidly. He called a financial advisor who claimed the reverse mortgage on their house was standard practice for elderly people needing cash. He painted a picture of 2 people who'd made poor decisions and now, in confusion, were blaming their children. But under Thessaly's cross-examination, the doctor admitted he hadn't seen Merritt in 18 months and had never evaluated him for cognitive decline. The financial advisor conceded he'd never actually met the Ashworths and was speaking generally, not specifically. Then Thessaly presented her case. She called the psychologist who'd evaluated Merritt and Cordelia, who testified they both scored well above average on cognitive tests. She presented the medical evaluations showing no signs of mental impairment. She called Gerald, who testified about Merritt's sharp memory and sound judgment during their recent interactions. And then Thessaly did something unexpected. She called Agent Crawford. The FBI agent took the stand and described in detail how Merritt and Cordelia had found the vault, documented it, and reported it. "In my 20 years with the Bureau," Crawford testified, "I've never seen civilians handle a discovery this significant with more presence of mind. They didn't steal the money. They didn't try to hide it. They carefully documented everything, took minimal evidence for credibility, and reported it through proper channels. These are not the actions of impaired individuals. These are the actions of people with strong moral compasses and clear thinking." The courtroom was silent. Judge Foster leaned forward. "Agent Crawford, in your professional opinion, do these individuals lack capacity to make their own legal decisions?" "Absolutely not, Your Honor. If anything, they demonstrated exceptional capacity under extraordinarily difficult circumstances." When Vaughan tried to cross-examine, Crawford was unshakable. "Mr. Vaughan, I've dealt with confused elderly people. I've dealt with people being manipulated. The Ashworths are neither. They're simply people who've been victimized and are now seeking justice." Finally, Judge Foster asked Merritt and Cordelia to approach the bench. They stood, holding hands, and walked forward together. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth," the judge said, her voice gentler now, "I've read the petitions, heard the testimony, and reviewed the evidence. I'm going to ask you some questions directly. Do you understand you're in court today?" "Yes, Your Honor," Merritt said clearly. "And do you understand your children are asking for guardianship over you?" "Yes," Cordelia said. "They want to control us so we can't hold them accountable for stealing from us." Judge Foster's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a serious accusation." Cordelia met her eyes steadily. "It's a serious crime they committed. They took our house, our savings, our dignity. They left us homeless in winter. And when we survived anyway, when we found something that could help other people who'd been hurt like us, they tried to paint us as crazy. We're not crazy, Your Honor. We're just old, and there's a difference." The judge was quiet for a moment. "Indeed there is, Mrs. Ashworth." She looked at the assembled crowd, at the former steelworkers, at Agent Crawford, at the mountain of evidence. "I'm going to rule from the bench. Petition for guardianship is denied. Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth have demonstrated clear competency, sound judgment, and remarkable moral character. Furthermore, I'm troubled by what appears to be a transparent attempt to use guardianship proceedings to avoid potential criminal liability." She looked directly at Dalton, Imogene, and Lowell. "If the allegations against you are true, you should be ashamed. Dismissed." The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Foster banged her gavel but didn't seem particularly upset by the outburst. Merritt and Cordelia embraced, tears streaming down both their faces. They'd won. They'd proven they weren't confused or incompetent or any of the things their children had claimed. They were simply people who'd been wronged and were fighting back. As they left the courtroom, Dalton caught Merritt's arm in the hallway. His face was no longer the mask of concern. Now it was anger, pure and cold. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "Both of you. We'll drag your names through the mud. We'll make sure everyone knows every mistake you ever made, every bill you paid late, every argument you ever had." Merritt pulled his arm free. "Do your worst, son. We've already lost everything that mattered to us, the day we realized our children had no hearts. There's nothing left you can take." He turned and walked away, Cordelia at his side, leaving his son standing alone in a courthouse hallway. But Dalton's threat wasn't empty. Over the next week, the smear campaign intensified. Somehow, private details of Merritt and Cordelia's life began appearing in tabloid articles. A minor car accident Merritt had been in 15 years ago was framed as evidence of declining faculties. A period when Cordelia had taken antidepressants after her mother's death was presented as proof of mental instability. Old acquaintances were interviewed, people who barely knew them, offering vague statements about concerning behavior and forgetfulness. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each story chipping away at their credibility. Cordelia found it devastating. "How can they do this?" she asked Thessaly. "How can our own children work so hard to destroy us?" Thessaly's expression was grim. "Because they're facing serious criminal charges. People fight hardest when they're cornered, and your children are very cornered right now." But the smear campaign had an unintended consequence. It made the former steelworkers even more determined to support Merritt and Cordelia. Gerald organized a defense committee. They created a website documenting the Ashworths' good works over the years, testimonials from people they'd helped, evidence of their character. Ramona started a crowdfunding campaign to help with legal expenses, though Thessaly was working pro bono. The community that had been devastated by the original theft decades ago now rallied around the people who'd exposed it. Local businesses offered support. The hotel where they'd been staying, paid for by the FBI initially, was now covered by donations. Restaurants sent meals. A local department store provided clothes. People who'd never met Merritt and Cordelia felt connected to their story because it represented something larger than one family's dysfunction. It represented the fight against powerful people who thought they could get away with anything. Then came the break they needed. The private investigator Dalton had hired to dig up dirt on his parents made a crucial mistake. He was caught trying to break into the Riverside Steelworks factory, attempting to access the vault. A factory security guard, hired by the FBI to protect the crime scene, caught him in the act. The investigator initially claimed he was just exploring, but when questioned, he admitted he'd been hired by Dalton Ashworth to see if there was any way to discredit his parents' discovery. Maybe plant evidence suggesting they'd staged it, or find proof they'd taken more money than they claimed. The revelation was devastating for the defense. Thessaly immediately filed a motion to introduce evidence of obstruction of justice. The DA's office upgraded the charges against Dalton, Imogene, and Lowell to include witness tampering and evidence destruction attempts. Marcus Vaughan, their attorney, tried to distance his clients from the investigator's actions, claiming he'd gone rogue. But the investigator, facing his own charges, was willing to testify. He provided emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls, proving Dalton had explicitly directed him to find something we can use at the factory. The case began to collapse. Imogen, the middle child, cracked first. She reached out to Thessaly through her own attorney, separate from her siblings. She wanted to talk. They met in a conference room, Imogene looking haggard and years older than she had in court. "I want to cooperate," she said without preamble. "I'll testify against Dalton and Lowell. I'll provide evidence. I can't do this anymore." Thessaly studied her carefully. "Why now?" Imogene's eyes filled with tears. "Because I saw my mother on the news, standing in front of that factory, talking about how they slept on concrete floors, and I remembered being 7 years old and having pneumonia. Mum stayed up with me for 3 straight nights, sleeping in a chair by my bed because she was afraid I'd stop breathing. She loved me that much, and I repaid her by stealing her home." She wiped at her eyes. "Dalton convinced us it was fine. He said they wouldn't remember, that they'd be taken care of, that we deserved the money for all we'd done for them. But he was wrong, and I was wrong to listen." Thessaly leaned forward. "If you testify, you're still going to face consequences. This doesn't make what you did go away." "I know," Imogene said. "I'll plead guilty to whatever charges fit. I'll accept whatever sentence comes. But maybe if I tell the truth, my parents can have some peace. And maybe someday they'll forgive me." The prosecution offered Imogene a deal, full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. She took it. With her testimony, they could prove the conspiracy, show how Dalton had orchestrated everything and brought his siblings into it. When Merritt and Cordelia learned Imogene wanted to cooperate, they had different reactions. Merritt was skeptical. "She's just trying to save herself." But Cordelia wondered. Maybe Or maybe she finally remembered who she used to be. They were given the option to meet with Imogen before she testified. Cordelia wanted to. Merritt was reluctant but agreed. They met in Thessaly's office with the attorney present. Imogen sat across from her parents, unable to meet their eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. There's no excuse for what I did. I betrayed you. I stole from you. I let you suffer, and I'm sorry." Cordelia looked at her daughter, this woman who'd once been her baby girl, who'd grown into someone capable of cruelty. "Why?" she asked simply. Imogen finally looked up. "Greed. Stupidity. Dalton made it sound so reasonable, and I wanted the money. I wanted the easier life. I convinced myself you wouldn't really understand what was happening, that it wasn't really hurting you." She paused. "But it did hurt you, terribly, and I can never take that back." "No," Cordelia agreed. "You can't." They sat in silence for a long moment. Merritt finally spoke. "Will you tell the truth? All of it, no matter how it makes you look?" "Yes," Imogen said. "I promise. It's the least I can do." They left without offering forgiveness or reconciliation. That might come later, or it might never come. But at least there would be truth. The criminal trial was scheduled for 8 weeks out. In the meantime, something else was happening. The former steelworkers' pension restoration process had begun. Agent Crawford kept Merritt and Cordelia updated on the progress. The $320 million was being processed, validated, and prepared for distribution. Forensic accountants were matching the stolen funds to the pension accounts they'd come from. Within 6 months, checks would begin going out to victims or their families. Gerald would get his pension restored, over $400,000 he'd been owed. Ramona would receive her late husband's full pension, enough to move out of the cramped apartment she'd been stuck in. Keith could afford medical treatments he'd been delaying. Hundreds of families would be made whole. "We did that," Cordelia said one evening, she and Merritt sitting in their hotel room watching the sunset. "We really did that." Merritt squeezed her hand. "You did that. You insisted we open that panel. You pushed when I would have walked away." She smiled. "We did it together, like always." The trial approached. Dalton and Lowell, realizing their position was hopeless with Imogen's testimony, tried to negotiate plea deals. But the DA's office, emboldened by public support and rock-solid evidence, wasn't offering much. They could plead guilty and get some reduction in sentencing, or go to trial and likely get convicted of everything. Finally, 1 week before trial, Dalton and Lowell both pled guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, forgery, and related charges. They were sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 3. Imogen, who'd cooperated, received 18 months and probation. All 3 were ordered to make full financial restitution, though there was little left to restitute. The house was sold, with proceeds going to Merritt and Cordelia. The cars were seized. The money was recovered where possible. But the real victory wasn't the convictions or the restitution. It was the validation. The court had confirmed what Merritt and Cordelia had known all along. They weren't confused, weren't incompetent, weren't wrong. They'd been victims of a calculated crime by people who should have protected them, and they'd survived. They'd fought back, and they'd won. On the day of sentencing, Merritt and Cordelia sat in the courtroom gallery. When the judge asked if they wanted to make victim impact statements, they both stood. Merritt went first. "Your Honor, my children stole our home, our savings, and our security. But worse than that, they stole our peace. They made us doubt ourselves. They made us feel like we were burdens, like we were losing our minds. That psychological abuse, that's what hurt most." He paused. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive them, but I hope they learn from this. I hope they understand that family means protecting people, not preying on them." Cordelia spoke next. "I raised these 3 people. I nursed them, taught them right from wrong, loved them unconditionally. Or so I thought. What they did to us, It broke something in me I didn't know could break. But it also revealed something I didn't know I had: strength. My husband and I survived the worst thing children can do to parents. And we didn't just survive, we helped others. That's something they can never take from us." She looked directly at her children. "I hope someday you find whatever you lost inside yourselves that let you do this. I hope you remember who you used to be before greed took over. But until then, you need to face consequences. Not because I hate you, but because actions matter." The courtroom was silent when she finished. The judge thanked them both and delivered the sentences. As Dalton, Imogene, and Lowell were led away, only Imogene looked back. Her eyes met her mother's, and in them was something that might have been remorse, or might have been recognition of how completely she'd destroyed something precious. Cordelia held her gaze for a moment, then looked away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Merritt and Cordelia, now accustomed to the attention, gave a brief statement. "Justice has been served," Merritt said simply. "Not just for us, but for all the families hurt by theft and betrayal. We hope our story reminds people that elder abuse is real, it's common, and it's criminal. Watch out for your elderly neighbors, your aging parents. Protect them because not everyone has family who will." What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power had already happened. They'd turned their nightmare upside down. They'd revealed truths nobody expected two elderly homeless people to uncover. And they'd proven that quiet voices, when they speak truth, carry power that can shake foundations and restore justice. That evening, back at their hotel, Thessaly came by with news. "I have something to show you," she said, pulling out papers. "Remember when Agent Crawford mentioned finder's fees?" Merritt nodded. "We said we didn't want money from those pension funds." "And you won't get it," Thessaly assured them. "But there's another pot of money, the interest that accrued on the stolen funds over 37 years. It was sitting in escrow accounts earning money. That interest doesn't belong to the pension victims, it belongs to no one specifically." She laid out the papers. "The court has ruled that as the finders and as victims of related fraud yourselves, you're entitled to that interest. It amounts to approximately $4 million. Cordelia's mouth fell open. Merritt couldn't speak. "You earned it," Thessaly said gently. "You did the right thing when it would have been easier to walk away or take the money. You helped hundreds of families. This is your reward for choosing integrity over desperation. $4 million. Enough to buy a house, a real one with heating and a porch. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. Enough to finally be secure again." Cordelia started crying. "We can plant roses," she said through tears. "We can plant all the roses you want, Delia." Merritt held her close. They'd entered an abandoned steel factory with nothing but each other and the clothes on their backs. They were leaving with their dignity restored, their truth validated, and a future they'd thought was lost forever. Sometimes the people who lose everything find something more valuable than what they lost. They find out who they really are when everything else is stripped away. And Merritt and Cordelia Ashworth, at 73 and 76, had discovered they were stronger, braver, and more righteous than they'd ever known. Spring came to the town with the kind of gentle insistence that makes you believe in second chances. The snow melted, revealing grass that had been buried for months. Trees budded, birds returned. And Merritt and Cordelia Ashworth, for the first time in over a year, had a home. It was a small house on Elm Street, just 4 blocks from where their old home on Maple Avenue had been. They'd chosen it specifically for the south-facing yard, perfect for a garden. The house itself was modest: 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with windows that let in morning light. It had good bones, Merritt said, the kind of house you could grow old in gracefully. The first thing Cordelia did was plant roses. She spent an entire Saturday on her knees in the dirt, Merritt beside her, working the soil with his arthritic hands like he was 20 years younger. They planted 12 bushes, peace roses, Mr. Lincoln roses, double delight roses. Each one went into the ground with care, with hope, with the understanding that some things, when you tend them properly, bloom more beautiful than before. Their neighbors on Elm Street welcomed them with quiet kindness. There was Margaret next door, a widow in her 60s who brought over a casserole the day they moved in. There was the young couple across the street, Tyler and Sarah, who offered to help with any repairs the house needed. There was old Herman, 2 houses down, who'd worked at Riverside Steel in the 80s and who shook Merritt's hand with tears in his eyes. "You gave me back my dignity," Herman said. "My pension check came last week. First time in 37 years I felt like the system worked." Merritt had smiled. "We just opened a door. The money was always there, waiting to come home. But it was more than that, and everyone knew it." By May, all the pension restoration checks had been distributed. Gerald bought a small fishing cabin he'd dreamed of for decades. Ramona paid off her debts and took her grandchildren on a vacation they'd never forget. Keith finally got the hip replacement surgery he'd been delaying. Over 400 families received checks ranging from thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars. The total distributed was just over $318 million, the rest having been absorbed by administrative costs and legal fees. But it was enough. It was justice delayed but not denied. The local newspaper ran a feature story tracking some of the recipients. There was William, who'd been forced to work as a Walmart greeter at age 82 because his pension disappeared. Now he could finally retire with dignity. There was Patricia, who'd been living in her daughter's basement. Now she could afford her own apartment. There was Frank, who'd been rationing his heart medication. Now he could afford proper treatment. Each story was a life changed, a wrong partially righted, a future restored. And at the center of it all were 2 people who'd been homeless and hopeless just months before. Agent Crawford stayed in touch. He'd call Merritt every few weeks just to check in, to update them on the ongoing investigation into the Riverside Steel corruption. It turned out James Kessler hadn't acted alone. There were 3 other executives involved, all deceased now, but their estates were being pursued for restitution. There were accountants who'd helped hide the theft, lawyers who'd structured the offshore accounts, a whole network of complicity that was being unraveled thread by thread. "You started something," Crawford told Merritt during one call. "This investigation has expanded to other factories, other pension thefts from that era. You might have helped expose a pattern of fraud that affected thousands more people." Merritt shared this with Cordelia that evening as they sat on their new porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Thousands more," she repeated softly. "All because we were desperate enough to sleep in an abandoned factory." "Or brave enough," Merritt corrected. She smiled. "Maybe both." Their lives settled into a new rhythm. Merritt volunteered at a local veterans center, helping younger vets navigate benefits and resources. Cordelia joined a quilting group and donated blankets to homeless shelters, remembering too well what it felt like to be cold. They went to church on Sundays, not the big evangelical place they'd attended before, but a small Methodist congregation that focused more on service than spectacle. They were asked to speak occasionally, to share their story, to inspire others. At first it was uncomfortable, standing in front of people, being seen. But they learned that their story mattered not because it was unique, but because it represented something universal, the triumph of integrity over adversity. In June, Thessaly called with unexpected news. "There's been a development with the factory site. The city wants to turn it into a memorial and community resource center. They're asking if you'd be willing to help with the planning." Merritt and Cordelia visited the site on a warm Tuesday morning. The factory looked different now. It had been secured, made safe, the broken windows boarded properly, the dangerous areas marked off. But the bones of it remained, that massive testament to industrial history and hidden secrets. They walked through with city planners and historical society members, discussing possibilities. "We want to preserve the vault," the lead planner explained. "Turn it into a museum exhibit about the theft and recovery. Show people what happened, why it mattered, how it was resolved." Cordelia liked that idea. And above ground? Community space, job training programs, resources for elderly residents, maybe a legal aid office so people can get help before they end up like you did, desperate and alone. And a memorial, Merritt added, for the workers who lost their pensions, the ones who didn't live long enough to see them restored. They agreed to help. Over the next months, Merritt and Cordelia became unexpected community leaders. They attended planning meetings, reviewed designs, raised funds. The project became known as the Riverside Workers Memorial and Justice Center. The name said it all: remembrance and action, past and future. By August, construction had begun. The factory's exterior was being restored, not to its original state, but to something beautiful. Graffiti was cleaned, rust was treated, windows were replaced. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. The old production floor became an event space with photographs lining the walls, faces of workers who'd built lives here. The offices became classrooms for job training and GDD programs. The cafeteria was reopened as a community kitchen, offering free meals to anyone who needed them. And in the basement, the vault was preserved exactly as Merritt and Cordelia had found it. Cases of money behind thick glass, documents on display, the whole story told with care and context. During construction, something unexpected happened. Lowell reached out. Not through lawyers this time, but through a handwritten letter forwarded by Thessaly. Merritt opened it one evening, Cordelia reading over his shoulder. "Dear Mom and Dad," it began. "I know I have no right to write to you. I know what I did is unforgivable. I'm in prison now, facing what I deserve. But I wanted you to know that I'm ashamed, not because I got caught, but because I finally understand what I took from you. I took your trust. I took your security. I took your peace. And for what? Money I didn't earn, didn't need, and that brought me nothing but emptiness. I'm in therapy here, trying to understand how I became someone capable of hurting the people who gave me life. The therapist says I have to take responsibility, not make excuses. So I won't. I did this. I chose greed over love. I chose selfishness over honor, and I destroyed something precious." The letter continued. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to ask for it, but I wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and that what you did, finding that money and giving it back, that showed me who you really are. You're better people at your worst than I am at my best. I hope someday I can become even a fraction of the people you are. I hope someday I can make amends, not to erase what I did, but to honor what you taught me before I forgot it. With love and deep regret, Lowell." Cordelia set the letter down with shaking hands. She didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was thick with emotion. "What do we do with this?" Merritt folded the letter carefully. "We think about it. We don't have to decide right now whether to forgive him or respond or anything. We let it sit." They did. The letter went into a drawer, not thrown away but not answered either. Some wounds need time. Some relationships, once broken, can't be rushed back together. Maybe someday they'd write back, maybe not. But at least Lowell was beginning to understand the weight of what he'd done. Dalton never wrote, never called, never acknowledged his guilt beyond the guilty plea his lawyer had negotiated. Some people, when confronted with their own darkness, turn toward the light. Others dig deeper into shadow. Imogene wrote several times. Her letters were filled with apologies and therapy insights and desperate attempts to explain. Cordelia read them but didn't respond. She wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. Forgiveness wasn't something you could demand or schedule. It came in its own time, if it came at all. By October, the Memorial Centre was nearing completion. A grand opening was scheduled for November 5th, almost exactly 1 year after Merritt and Cordelia had first entered the factory, desperate and freezing. The date felt significant, symbolic. A year ago they'd been homeless victims. Now they were honoured citizens, their story inspiring changes in elder abuse laws, pension protection regulations, and community support systems. The night before the opening, Merritt and Cordelia returned to the factory alone. The construction crew had left. The lights were off except for emergency lighting. They stood in the main hall, now beautiful and purposeful and remembered. "We slept upstairs," Cordelia said, pointing. "In that maintenance office. We were so cold, Merritt, so scared." "I know," he said, taking her hand. "I remember thinking this might be where we died, on a concrete floor in a building no one cared about." She squeezed his fingers. "But instead it's where we found life again. Purpose, each other really. I mean, we'd been together 52 years, but that night sleeping on that floor, I understood what together really meant." Merritt nodded. "It means staying, no matter what. It means not giving up on each other even when everything else is gone." They walked down to the vault, now enclosed in glass and lit with soft museum lighting. The cases of money were gone, distributed to their rightful owners, but the desk remained. The documents remained. The story remained. "People will come here," Cordelia said, "and they'll learn about corruption and theft and injustice. But I hope they also learn about the other part, the part where two people chose right over easy, the part where victims became victors." The opening ceremony the next day was larger than anyone expected. Over 300 people attended, including former steel workers, local officials, media, and families who'd received pension restorations. There were speeches. Gerald spoke about what the pension return meant to him and others. Agent Crawford spoke about the importance of citizens reporting financial crimes. Thessaly spoke about elder abuse prevention and legal resources. And then it was Merritt and Cordelia's turn. They stood at the podium, hands clasped, looking out at a sea of faces. Some they knew, most they didn't. But all of them were there because of a choice made on a freezing January night. Merritt spoke first. "My wife and I didn't set out to be heroes. We were just trying to survive. But in that survival, we stumbled onto something bigger than ourselves. We found evidence of crimes that had hurt our community for decades. And we had a choice, use it to save ourselves or use it to save others." He paused. "We chose others, not because we're saints, but because that's what our parents taught us, what our community taught us, what a lifetime of being decent people taught us. And in choosing to help others, we ended up helping ourselves more than we could have imagined." Cordelia took over. "This building was a tomb when we found it, a place where secrets were buried and justice had died. Now it's alive again. It's a place of truth, of healing, of community. And that transformation happened because people chose to care, to listen, to act." She looked directly at the former workers in attendance. "Some of you lost everything when this factory closed. You lost your pensions, your security, your futures. We can't give you back the years you struggled. We can't undo the stress, the heartbreak, the sacrifice. But we can give you this, acknowledgement. Your suffering mattered, your loss was real, and now, finally, justice has been served." The applause was thunderous. People stood. Some were crying. Merritt and Cordelia cut the ribbon, officially opening the Riverside Workers' Memorial and Justice Center. And then they watched as people poured inside to explore the exhibits, read the stories, learn the history. In a quiet corner, a wall held photographs of all 400-plus workers whose pensions had been stolen and restored. Their names, their faces, their stories. Some had lived to see restoration, others hadn't. But all were remembered now. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, an elderly woman approached Cordelia. She was bent with age, using a walker, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Mrs. Ashworth?" Cordelia turned. "Yes?" "My name is Evelyn Kessler. James Kessler was my father." Cordelia froze. The thief, the man who'd stolen everything and hidden it beneath this building. His daughter was here? Evelyn saw her expression and nodded sadly. I know what he did. I only found out recently, from the news coverage. My father died when I was in my 20s. I thought he was a good man. Learning the truth has been devastating." She gripped her walker tightly. "I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean much coming from me, but I'm sorry for what he did. To you, to all these families. If I'd known, if I'd had any idea, I would have reported him myself." Cordelia studied this woman, this daughter carrying shame for sins that weren't hers. She understood that burden better than most. "You're not responsible for your father's choices," Cordelia said gently. "Just like he wasn't responsible for yours. We're all just ourselves, accountable for our own actions." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for saying that. And thank you for what you did. You could have kept the money. No one would have known. But you gave it back. You did what my father should have done. You were the person he should have been." They stood together for a moment, two women connected by theft and redemption, by fathers and choices, by the long shadow history casts. Then Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is a donation to the center. It's not much, just $5,000, but I want to help. I want my father's name associated with something good, even if it's just through me." Cordelia accepted the envelope. "We'll use it well. Maybe we'll create a scholarship, second chances or something, for people trying to rebuild after they've lost everything." Evelyn smiled through tears. "He would have liked that. Or at least the man I thought he was would have." As winter approached again, 1 year after their ordeal began, Merritt and Cordelia Ashworth settled fully into their new life. The roses had been cut back for the season, but they'd bloomed beautifully all summer, filling the yard with color and fragrance. The house on Elm Street felt like home now, filled with furniture donated by the community and memories made fresh. They had dinner every Sunday with a rotating cast of friends, Gerald and his wife Ramona and her grandchildren, Thessaly, who'd become like a daughter to them, Agent Crawford when he was in town. Their table was never empty. Their home was never silent. They'd lost one family but gained another, chosen this time, built on respect and shared experience rather than blood alone. One December evening, as snow began to fall softly outside, Merritt found Cordelia in the living room looking at a photo album. It held pictures from their old life, salvaged from the few boxes they'd managed to keep when everything fell apart. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her on the couch. She showed him a photograph. Dalton, Imogen, and Lowell as children, maybe ages 8, 6, and 4. They were on a beach somewhere, building a sandcastle, laughing, innocent. "I was trying to remember when I lost them," she said softly. "When they stopped being these kids and became people who could hurt us." Merritt looked at the photo. "I don't think it was one moment. I think it was 1,000 small choices, each one taking them a little further from who they were raised to be." "Do you think they can come back?" she asked. "From where they've gone? Do you think they can become good again?" Merritt was quiet for a while. "Lowell, maybe. He seems to be trying. Imogen, I don't know. She cooperated, but I'm not sure if it was conscience or calculation. Dalton, he's too far gone, too proud to admit he was wrong." Cordelia closed the album. "I thought being a mother meant loving them no matter what, but maybe it means knowing when to let them face consequences, knowing when love means stepping back instead of protecting them from their own choices." "You're a good mother, Delia. You always were. What they became, that's on them, not you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. We did okay though, didn't we? With the life we built, with each other? We did better than okay, Merritt said. We built something real, something that lasted even when everything else was stripped away. That's more than most people can say. Outside, the snow fell heavier now, coating Elm Street in white, softening edges, making the world quiet and clean. Inside, two people who'd survived the worst winter of their lives now watched a new winter begin without fear. They'd learned something essential in that abandoned factory, in that freezing darkness, in that desperate searching. They'd learned that what you carry inside yourself, your integrity, your love, your courage, those things can't be stolen. They can only be surrendered. And they'd refused to surrender. Months passed, seasons changed. The Memorial Center thrived, hosting events, helping families, telling stories. Merritt and Cordelia remained involved, but stepped back from the spotlight. They'd never wanted fame anyway, just justice and peace. One warm afternoon in late spring, Cordelia was in the garden planting new roses when a car pulled up. She looked up, wiping dirt from her hands, to see Imogen stepping out. Her daughter looked older, thinner, marked by her time in prison and its aftermath. She'd been released 2 weeks ago after serving her full 18 months. She stood by the fence, not entering the yard, just waiting. Cordelia stood slowly, her knees protesting. She walked to the fence, close enough to see Imogen's face clearly, far enough to maintain distance. "Mom," Imogen said, voice shaking. "I know I have no right to be here. Thessaly said you wouldn't mind if I came by, but if you want me to leave, I'll leave." Cordelia studied her daughter. Saw the shame, the hope, the fear. "What do you want, Imogen?" I want to say I'm sorry, face to face, not in a letter, not through lawyers. I want you to see my eyes when I say it, so you know I mean it." She took a shaking breath. "I destroyed your trust. I stole your home. I left you homeless and cold and scared. And I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry." Cordelia felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't let them fall. "Why should I believe you?" "You shouldn't," Imogen said immediately. "I have to earn that, if you'll let me. Not by saying the right things, but by doing right things. By showing you over time that I remember who you raised me to be." She paused. "I'm not asking for forgiveness today, maybe not ever. I'm just asking for a chance to prove I'm trying to be better, to be the daughter you deserved all along." Cordelia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm planting roses. If you want to help, you can." Imogen's face crumpled with relief and tears. She came through the gate carefully, respectfully, and knelt in the dirt beside her mother. They worked in silence for a while, hands in earth, planting things that would bloom. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a start. It was possibility. That evening, Cordelia told Merritt about Imogen's visit. He listened without judgment. "How do you feel about it?" Cordelia thought carefully. "Like I'm planting roses. I'm putting something in the ground and hoping it grows, but knowing it might not, knowing I can't control it, only tend it and wait." Merritt understood. That was all any of them could do. Tend what was broken and wait to see if healing took root. Anyone can choose dignity over desperation, honesty over greed, and prove that sometimes the people who lose everything are the ones who find what the world forgot was valuable. As the sun set over Elm Street on a perfect spring evening, Merritt and Cordelia Ashworth sat on their porch swing, watching the world soften into twilight. Their small house glowed warm behind them. Their garden bloomed with roses in every color. Somewhere across town, the Memorial Center hosted an event for families seeking help. Somewhere, a pension check arrived for a worker who'd waited 37 years. Somewhere, an elderly person found resources to protect themselves from abuse. Somewhere, someone heard their story and chose courage over fear. The mechanic who once slept on concrete floors now rested in comfort, but never forgot the cold. The seamstress who'd lost everything now had plenty, but never forgot the hunger. Together they descended into darkness and found not just money, but purpose. Not just justice, but redemption. Their children had tried to bury them. Instead, they'd buried corruption. Their children had tried to silence them. Instead, they'd given voice to hundreds of victims. Their children had tried to take everything. Instead, they'd proven that what matters most can't be stolen, only chosen. Merritt reached over and took Cordelia's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 53 years together. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," she replied. "Always have, always will." The stars began to appear, tiny lights piercing the gathering dark, and two people who'd been betrayed by family had become family to an entire community. They'd bought an abandoned factory for 75 cents and discovered 320 million in justice waiting below. But more than that, they'd discovered themselves, strong and righteous and unbreakable. Because for Merritt and Cordelia Ashworth, the journey from victims to victors wasn't about money or recognition or revenge. It was about remembering who they'd always been and refusing to let betrayal change that. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't buried in vaults, but hidden in human hearts. And sometimes the people who seem to have lost everything are actually the richest of all. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you. Click now to keep discovering with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth always rises, even from the deepest darkness.